The man walked forward with a heavy gaze. The room was filled with small, terrifying zombies, and he carefully weaved through them. Looking around, he suddenly realized this used to be a pediatric emergency room. Negan, who had vowed to turn over a new leaf and never harm a child, was about to face his greatest life-or-death crisis since the outbreak. The story went back to one day earlier. Negan noticed that Ginny's wound was severely infected. Despite using numerous medications, she remained feverish, unconscious, and struggled to breathe. Fortunately, the Brotherhood was a powerful force with many informants. Negan soon caught wind of a rumor. The third-floor operating room at the city center hospital was stocked with large supplies of medicine and medical equipment. However, everyone who had gone to retrieve these supplies never returned. Negan ignored that last warning entirely. Ginny's condition was critical, and he had to get those medicines and emergency supplies no matter what. He entrusted the clerk to watch over Ginny, then set off alone on his risky journey. It was hard to say what was going through his mind. Already the leader of a gang, yet willing to risk his life by storming into a dragon's den. The hospital had long been abandoned, with broken medical equipment scattered across the floors. Outside the sealed main entrance, a security guard turned zombie repeatedly slammed against the glass in a mechanical rhythm. Negan followed the signs up to the third floor, skillfully avoiding the zombies roaming the corridors. But suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. A half-grown zombie, barely the size of a child, let out a chilling roar as it approached. Negan had never harmed children, even when they were zombies. A pang of hesitation hit him, and he began to step back cautiously. But in his hesitation, he tripped and lost consciousness. When he came to, the terrifying zombie face was mere inches from his own. Fighting back nausea, Negan struggled to stand. Despite nearly losing his life, he refused to harm the child zombie. Composing himself, Negan continued down the hallway. Soon, he saw more small zombies standing ahead. A sign on the wall told him he was in the pediatric emergency room. Thankfully, all the children were in a dormant state. Taking a deep breath, Negan carefully made his way through the group of zombies. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed from above, as if someone was running on the upper floor. Negan didn't want to cause any more trouble and headed straight into his destination, the operating room. But there were no medicines or equipment to be found. Frustrated, he smashed through every wall, yet found nothing. Then, a strange noise came from the ceiling. A dark figure suddenly leapt out from the ventilation shaft. Without hesitation, Negan gave chase. As they passed the pediatric emergency room, the sleeping zombies were awakened. Negan dodged and weaved, barely escaping their grasp. Finally, he caught up to the figure in the main hall on the first floor, but the person's backpack was empty. Even more shocking, when the figure removed their mask, Negan saw the face of his deceased wife, Lucille. He could hardly believe his eyes. Though he knew it was all an illusion, the guilt inside him was overwhelming. Over and over, he muttered apologies. Suddenly, his vision blurred, and the figure shifted. Now it was his current wife, and along with their child. Seeing this, mother and child stirred deep guilt in Negan's heart. Guided by Anne, Negan moved toward a glass door behind which stood a zombie. With a single slash, he knocked it down, and behind it, he found a perfectly functioning ventilator. Meanwhile, Maggie, following the clues Negan had provided, ventured alone into the opera house in search of her son. She wandered through the vast building, her heart flickering with hope when she suddenly heard a haunting melody. But when she pushed open the door to the music room, all she found was a charred corpse. Her beloved son was nowhere to be seen. Frustrated, Maggie shut off the music, only to notice a shadowy figure sitting in the corner. It was Croat, the man Negan had expelled from the Brotherhood. With no other options left, Maggie drew her knife and threatened him, demanding to know Herschel's whereabouts. Croat's eyes glazed over, and he slowly uttered a few words.
Maybe.
In no time, the two arrived at a unique hideout, a studio converted from an elevator shaft that could instantly transport them to the rooftop, offering a panoramic view of the entire neighborhood. Croat explained that this was a private space specially built by Dama for Herschel. Unfortunately, the boy was not there at the moment. Hearing this, Maggie felt a pang of guilt. As a mother, she realized she hadn't done nearly enough. Changing the subject, she brought up the matter of Herschel's forcibly amputated toes. Croat, however, revealed that Herschel had willingly offered his toes to Dama. Maggie fell into a heavy silence. Croat's gaze then landed on a sketch on the table, triggering his memory of a secret safe house on the top floor of the Twin Towers. He explained that Dama had created it as a sanctuary and had instructed that, in times of crisis, Herschel should be given priority to use it. The two quickly arrived at the towering Twin Towers. The passage in the left building had been completely destroyed, leaving only one option: climb the right tower to the top floor and cross the glass walkway to reach the secret safe house. Though aware of the deadly traps lurking at every step, Maggie was determined to take the risk for the sake of finding her son. Inside the staircase of the right tower, Croat carefully ascended. The entire area was rigged with lethal traps that had to be disarmed before moving forward. Seizing a moment, Maggie glanced through the gaps in the stairs and was suddenly hit by a wave of dizziness that made her want to jump. Suddenly, a triggered mechanism sent a swinging iron hammer inches from her head. Maggie was stunned, doubting whether Herschel could have made it past such deadly obstacles. Croat gave a knowing smile. Don't underestimate that kid. After a grueling climb to the rooftop, the two faced a maze made of filing cabinets. Luckily, Croat knew the way, preventing them from getting lost. But Maggie's nerves were frayed, nearly snapping under the pressure. After dispatching several zombies, she suddenly realized Croat had disappeared. Overwhelmed by panic and exhaustion, Maggie finally collapsed to the floor. When Maggie woke up again, she found herself in a conference room. It turned out Croat had dragged her out of the maze. Surprisingly, he wasn't just a ruthless schemer. He was also a bit of a tech geek, having managed to fix her broken flashlight. Croat couldn't help but drift into memories. As a child, he had been fascinated by engineering. Despite his family's poverty and the ridicule he faced, his mother was the only one who firmly supported his dreams. In his heart, she was a guardian angel. Maggie was touched by this, but now her focus was on finding her son. Croat understood immediately and led her to a glass suspension bridge. Crossing it would bring them to the hidden safe house. But Maggie suddenly hesitated. Looking down through the glass at the street hundreds of meters below, a wave of vertigo froze her legs. Just as she was about to close her eyes and cross, two zombies lunged at her from behind. During the struggle, she fell onto the glass floor, spiderweb cracks spreading beneath her. More zombie snarls came from behind. Croat urged her to spread her weight and slowly crawl forward. Suddenly, Maggie's legs were grabbed by zombies, and the cracks in the glass bridge widened dangerously. In the nick of time, Croat threw her a metal ladder. As she grabbed it, the glass bridge shattered with a sharp cracking sound. Still shaken, Maggie stepped into the safe house, only to be met with disappointment once again. Herschel was nowhere to be found. She noticed Croat quietly flipping through old photographs. Suddenly, everything clicked. Croat had known all along that Herschel wasn't there. He had deliberately led her to this place. Croat said nothing as Maggie hung half his body out the window. As he looked at the photos in his hands, a faint look of relief crossed his face. Sensing danger, Maggie yanked him back inside. Oddly enough, it was she who suddenly felt a strange urge to jump. Croat caught her just in time, steadying her away from the ledge. Then, he confessed the truth behind why he had brought her here. This safe house was where Croat had lived when he first arrived in New York. Inside were old photos of his mother. At age 12, Croat was abandoned by his mother. He spent 10 years searching for her, only to discover she had been living just 10 kilometers away and had passed away only 2 days earlier. Croat knew Dama had been using him all along, but he didn't blame her. She had seen through his heart and given him a family warmth he'd never known before. Now that Dama was gone and he had been cast out of the Brotherhood, Croat was ready to end his own life. That's why he had tricked Maggie into coming, hoping she would be the one to kill him. But Croat didn't have the courage to take his own life. Maggie was furious upon hearing this. Just as she worried about Herschel, a beam of light suddenly shone through a window of the building across the street, reigniting her hope. Meanwhile, Negan returned to the church carrying the ventilator, entrusting Ginny's care to the recorder. He knew the curator's ambitions were ruthless and that no one in the church would be spared. To protect those he cared about, Negan resolved to awaken the cold-blooded man he once was, preparing to eliminate all threats with brutal force. At the same time, Maggie had returned to the street, standing before the building where the light signal had come from. Croat said his goodbyes, determined to start a new life. Maggie followed the signal inside the illuminated room, where she finally came face to face with her long-lost son. But Herschel's eyes were surprisingly calm. Caught up in joy, Maggie didn't notice anything amiss. Suddenly, Herschel's gaze shifted, and the supposedly dead Dama appeared out of nowhere, knocking Maggie unconscious with a single blow. That wraps up episode 7 of Dead City. In this twisted tale, the zombies weren't fearsome creatures anymore. They were just tools. If they weren't getting slaughtered as disposable pawns in gang wars, they were being harvested for methane, treated like raw fuel. And if luck ran out, they were thrown into gladiator pits for sadistic entertainment. One of Manhattan's biggest gangs, the Arts Collective, marched into a church under their leader, the ever-smug curator, to join the so-called Alliance celebration. Everyone followed the rules and left their weapons outside. To show good faith, the curator even gifted a pristine Virgin Mary statue, pretending it was a sincere gesture for their coalition against the New Babylon Federation. But Negan just watched with that trademark smirk. He already knew the truth. Alliances were just illusions. The curator had already been cozying up to New Babylon behind everyone's backs. Still, Negan welcomed them with smiles and a feast. The curator, clearly rattled, didn't dare touch the food. Negan sliced off a piece of roast, chewed slowly, savoring every second like a man watching his trap spring shut. The curator's fake grin cracked. Armstrong, camouflaged in the crowd, noticed something off, strange water stains on the church benches. Before he could act, Negan flipped the banquet table like a magician, revealing his final trick, exposing a dozen zombies hidden beneath. More undead burst in from the sides, trapping the curator's crew in a tightening noose of rotting flesh. And then came the fire. Flamethrowers lit up the oil-soaked pews, turning the exit into an inferno. Negan leaned back against the table, chomping on an apple, watching calmly as chaos exploded around him. With his gang dying by the second, the curator finally roared a signal. Armstrong got the message, stormed forward, and toppled the Virgin statue, revealing stashed melee weapons inside. The surviving soldiers scrambled for swords and axes, and suddenly, the tide turned. Negan's smirk faded. He signaled his crew, and they rushed into battle. But the curator had one more trick. He'd hidden his own flamethrower, torched one of the enemy fire troops, and blew a hole in the burning barricade. Bloodied but alive, he wiped his face, locked eyes with the retreating Negan, and gave chase. Elsewhere, Maggie had been hunting for her son, only to fall straight into Dama's trap. When she came to, she was tied to a chair in some eerie office space. Staying calm, Maggie scanned the room and spotted keys on a filing cabinet. She launched herself forward, legs first, and made a plan to escape. Just as she snatched the key, the door creaked open, and in walked Dama herself. Not a corpse, not a ghost, just very much alive. The body Maggie saw before had been a decoy, Dama claimed, a clever stand-in while she hid in the shadows. From Herschel, she'd learned all about the blood-soaked drama between Maggie and Negan. So now she wanted a deal. Maggie would kill Negan and, in return, Dama would let her rebuild what she'd lost. Maggie stayed silent, unreadable. But Dama's sharp eyes caught the missing key. She smirked coldly and warned Maggie not to play games. Maggie, cornered, had no choice but to hand it over. Dama assured her she hadn't manipulated Herschel. Instead, she was helping the boy build a better world. Sensing Maggie's skepticism fading, Dama leaned in, shifting the spotlight back onto her. She claimed Negan had left wounds in her life that never healed, wounds that poisoned Maggie's relationship with her own son. In a world crumbling into rot, she said, family was the only thing that mattered. Maggie didn't buy the pitch, but when Herschel suddenly entered the room, her heart cracked. Faced with her son's pleading eyes, she finally agreed to Dama's proposal.
I'll finish him. Then I'll come back for you.
Meanwhile, poor Benjamin, the record keeper turned reluctant soldier, had been assigned to guard the docks. With no fight in him, he killed time flirting with a female guard, until he spotted a ferry bobbing on the horizon. Moments later, rafts landed silently on shore. Before they could raise the alarm, the rooftop door exploded open. Benjamin, white as a sheet, blurted out that he was a New Babylon loyalist, desperate to survive. Back in the underground chambers, the curator tracked Negan into a dark basement, only to realize too late it was a trap. Shadows moved. From the blackness, Negan stepped forward, barbed bat in hand, wearing that infamous grin like a mask of death. The curator panicked, throwing Armstrong under the bus, claiming he'd only betrayed the Alliance under New Babylon's pressure. But Negan said nothing. The curator tried again, promising that together, they could monopolize the methane supply and crush New Babylon. Still no answer. Then, cold as steel, Negan ordered them both to kneel. He said he'd play a little game, point and kill. As Armstrong trembled, Maggie crept in unnoticed. She watched as Negan raised his bat, the motion triggering haunting memories. But just as Armstrong braced for the blow, Negan turned his bat toward the curator. "You," he growled, "are the one I've wanted to kill all along." He jammed a methane tube into the curator's mouth. As a small flame drifted closer, boom. The curator's reign ended in a fireball. Armstrong broke free during the chaos, sprinting into the nearby methane refinery. Negan told his men to guard the door, then stalked in with his blood-slicked bat. He was savoring the hunt, cat and mouse, predator and prey. Maggie made her move, slitting the throats of guards outside like it was second nature. Armstrong, cornered, grabbed a steel pipe and lunged, but even with surprise on his side, he was no match. Negan caught him, raised the bat, and just as he was about to crush Armstrong's skull, slash. A blade buried into Negan's back. Maggie had stabbed him. The pain hit hard. Negan stumbled out of the room, bleeding and desperate, needing to see one last thing before he died. Maggie picked up his bat, but didn't follow through. Something inside her hesitated. She followed instead. In a small adjacent chamber, a pale hand reached through the bars. Ginny. She was gone. Even with machines keeping her breathing, the infection had won. Her lifeless face stared back, zombified. Negan's scream echoed through the halls. Raw, guttural, soul-breaking. Ginny hadn't been family, not by blood, but Negan had poured every drop of his fragile humanity into protecting that girl. Maggie knew it too. In silence, she handed him her knife. That was the moment the fire in her dimmed. The revenge, the hate, it dissolved in the face of Negan's grief. As he ended Ginny's suffering, Maggie watched, and something shifted. Maybe it was understanding, or maybe it was shared sorrow. Later, Armstrong helped a weakened Negan into a room, tending to his wounds while Negan sat motionless, buried in guilt. Maggie's rage had cooled. She returned to the office, hoping to finally bring her son back. But Herschel had changed. Cold-eyed, he accused her of being manipulated by Negan, insisted he would follow Dama instead and help build her perfect new world. Maggie, shattered, had no choice but to leave alone. She walked back to the church, where she joined Armstrong and Negan in silence. The tangled web of hatred and vengeance suddenly seemed so small in a world falling apart. Then came the chance. Marching boots. The second wave of New Babylon troops had arrived, storming Manhattan with state-of-the-art gear and full control of the city's methane reserves. From atop a crumbling skyscraper, Dama watched it all unfold, defeated and hollow. Her intricate schemes, all her careful plays for power, had only made it easier for this new empire to rise. And as the city slipped from her grasp, her eyes burned with rage and despair. On the ground, Negan turned to Maggie. Memories of blood and fire, of betrayal and redemption, surged between them. Every scar they carried, every loss, had led to this moment. They had both fallen countless times, clawing their way back again and again. They'd seen beauty from mountaintops and terror in the abyss. But now, they chose to drop their weapons and walk side by side. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was theirs to walk together. And that, folks, wrapped up Season 2 of Dead City. Honestly, besides Negan, most of the cast felt like filler. Armstrong had plenty of screen time, sure, but his indecisiveness didn't move the needle. Benjamin might as well have been a background prop. And don't even get me started on those two kids. The forced stupidity of their decisions was downright infuriating. Herschel existed just to turn Maggie into a glorified babysitter, watering down everything that once made her fierce and fascinating. Fans didn't come here to see Maggie spiral into a family drama. People wanted the sharp-edged warrior back. Anyway, that's it for today. Got your own take? Drop it in the comments. I'm Horror Story Capped, and I'll catch you in the next nightmare.